Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I have an amazing guest on today, Alan, and we'll look at his background. He was a world class chef turned businessman and entrepreneur in the payment space. So, Alan, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to dig into this background, how it correlates into what you're doing now, because it really is a super interesting story.
Oh, thank you for having me on the show today.
Yeah, yeah. And I was on Alan's show. What was that, Alan? Was it 2 weeks ago or a week
Yeah, a
ago?
couple weeks ago. It's gonna come up soon.
Yeah. So we talked all things social media, personal branding, all that good stuff. So in one of the top business podcasts right now. So it was a pleasure to be on there. But and Alan, what I would love to do is, first dive into your background as a chef. So how did that career start? How did you get your start in that space?
So I worked in restaurants for quite a while, and then I wanted to go. My idea was to go to the Culinary Institute of America. At the time, it was a very tiny school, so it wasn't possible for me to go there. And the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted to be a DJ on the radio. And this friend of mine was a DJ, and I actually got to go mess around with him, but he was like just starting out. So he was like on the midnight shift. So it was really interesting to see like what goes on. Now that business is completely different because you don't, most stations don't require the disc jockeys to have a FCC license because they have somebody else in there to that's licensed. But yeah, and then I ended up finding out about a program, an apprenticeship program, and that's how I got started in serious cooking and learning how to cook, classic cuisine at a place called the Capital City Club in downtown Atlanta, and worked for quite a few chefs there and learned. They put for 3 years. I worked every single area in the kitchen, from the butcher, the baker, the cold food, the salads, the prepping, cooking, line cooking for the restaurant, cooking for the employees, cooking for parties, everything, ice carving, everything that you can possibly do. It's a very upscale executive type dining club. And then I moved to Dallas and worked out there at several restaurants. The last hotel I was at was called the Melrose Hotel. That restaurant was named in one of the best restaurants in Dallas, one of the best Sunday brunches, and bunch of magazines and newspapers. And then I moved back to Florida after that company got sold and worked down here for a while, and then ended up in the payments business in 1998. And got tired of working 14 hours a day, 6 7 days a week, and nights and weekends and holidays, and I was 38 at the time. Started working in payments for a couple years, and then I started this company January 2001. And, the payments industry is a very interesting industry. One of my friends recommended it to me. He goes, "Oh, I'm making a lot of money. You should try it." He was living in another state. And how I started my company was one day I was in a place picking up some equipment. A guy gave me a magazine called The Green Sheet, and I actually write for that magazine. Had a column in there that just ended. I did a 2 year stint where I had an article every 2 weeks for 2 years in that magazine. And the magazine's aimed at professionals and bankers that are in the payments industry. And I wanted to impart my wisdom on everybody, not just on like what I knew, but like what's happening, where's everything trending in our industry and things like that. And it's the industry's changed a lot from, people just having and they didn't even look like cool like this back in the day. There's like square box with a bunch of buttons on it and a tiny screen, you know. It wasn't like
Yeah,
these Android machines that we have now, and you don't need a wire back in the day. I tell people stories. I'm like, we used to have to get out paperwork, and it was 4 pieces of paper. Nobody even knows what that is. And you had to press hard because it had to go through all these carbon copies. And we had to take Polaroid pictures, and then we had these little machines. And you had to hook them up to the phone line. Today, you just turn on the machine, hook it up to the internet, punch in a code, punch in another button, and within 2 or 3 minutes, the machine's downloaded.
yep,
But
yeah, yeah.
back in the day, they would take 20 minutes, 30 minutes each to download machines.
Wow,
It was
I
crazy,
love
and
it,
you're
man.
using phone lines, and you had to put in a call waiting block unless even if they had a fax machine, because back then people had fax machines too.
Mhm.
So you had to really I used to carry around like a little tool, a box in the trunk of my car with phone lines in it of all lengths, little adapters for the
Yeah,
phone lines. You had to learn a lot of little tricks, to go take care of people's today, everything's on the internet, and so many businesses are online.
right, right. Well, and what I would love to dig into too is, when you were a chef and you were coming up in your career up until the point of your late 30s, what do you feel like were the biggest lessons that you learned or your biggest takeaways from that time that you still apply today? Like, what lessons do you feel were the biggest
Well,
lessons?
one thing is like when we before we even got on here, I said, first of all, you're gonna own a bit. When you're the chef, it's just not about cooking, right? That's the first thing I remember my mentor told me. He said, Don Hamilton, it's not just about cooking. And it's about, you're also the chef is a businessman, right? So you have to know how to cook, create, but you also need to have a bit mind for business because, like I was chef of an entire hotel, and you're in charge of an entire hotel. That hotel is doing, more million, 2, 3 million a month in food and beverage revenue. So that means you're purchasing probably 30% of that budget is for food. So that's a lot of food. At $1 million a month, you're purchasing 2 to 300,000 dollars of food. Well, you have to know what you're doing when you're purchasing that much food. How do you do it? What systems do you have in place? We didn't have computers. It was a spreadsheets and pieces of paper with, how much are your tomatoes this week? How
Yeah.
much is, and it's not just, you have to learn, quality, quantities, what what you're buying. So you have to really be careful about what you're buying and all that because you can't start with garbage and expect to make a good dish from rotten tomatoes. You have to get good quality product and you have to know how to price things out. So you learn a lot about pricing, collecting money. I remember working with my first point of sale system. Like we didn't have, when I first started, everything was on paper. The waitresses would write it all down and that's how it would be. And then we got into, point of sale systems and how they worked. And that was super interesting. But, you have to understand that you're a business person. And I had my first experience with a sale because my boss came to me and said, "Oh, we're going to host this group in the hotel for an entire weekend. They want to talk to you about what they want." And I'm like, "Whatever, that's the salesperson's job." And they were like, "No, you're the chef. You got to get in there and tell them the chef stuff." So, I had to put on my chef hat and my thinking cap and think back to when I was in culinary school, which was several years before that. Dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit.
Yeah.
So,
100%.
but
And I have
that
another friend who's so he's coming up in the tech space. He's built a very
right.
successful tech company over the last, I think, 6 years they've been at it. and he started right out of college in the restaurant business. And he worked in the restaurant business, I think, 4 years right out of college, and his biggest thing was the margins are so slim, and you have to just continuously look, where can we optimize? How can we optimize the shifts? Now ordering the food. Was that what it was like for you where you're just under constant pressure of how can we
Yeah,
improve?
you're
How can we
under,
improve?
we got you have to maintain a certain food cost, a certain labor cost, and and maintain profitability. And you have to, you just can't, you have to know what's in. I mean, imagine I was running my first executive chef position. The kitchen was 3 stories high. So there was a storeroom, and then down there in the same basement was our storage areas, refrigerated and dry storage, plus an employee cafeteria. We had to feed about 400 employees a day. So you're feeding them, then you're feeding all the guests coming through. We had 2 restaurants that were open, one breakfast, lunch, and dinner. One was open for lunch and dinner. Yeah, and we had a banquet space for sitting down. Everybody in every single room could be more than 1,000 people. So if there was a convention or something, yeah, you could be feeding a lot of people. And so you have a lot to do. You have to know what's in every single cooler. That was one of my things every day, was to walk through the coolers and find all the leftovers and see what we were going to do with them. We had a lunch buffet every day, plus we had to feed the employees. And you got to really get creative sometimes if you have leftovers from a party or whatever. I mean, hotels is a whole different animal than a restaurant. Restaurants, you have a set menu, you're dealing with a set amount of food. And in a restaurant, you have to make sure, like, hey, the food is all fresh. You don't have old fish, because nobody wants to eat old fish. So you have to really work on engineering a menu and learning. Like I came to that hotel, and the hotel was a disaster. So the first thing I had to do is redo the menu. So you don't just go, okay, I'm the chef, I'm going to just put all this cool stuff on the menu, right? You got to go, okay, well, how do you find out what everybody's eating? So you got to sit in the dining room and watch in a regular clothes, watch what are people eating, what are they not eating, what they like, what they don't like, talk to the servers and ask the servers when people come in, what do they want to eat? What are they asking for? What don't we have on the menu that the people want on the menu? And remember, I had to beg my boss. Every hotel I went into, they didn't have a char broiler, right? Like a grill, like you have at your
Right.
house, a gas grill, get those grill marks, nice, grill marks on the steak or the burger or the chicken. They didn't have that. And I'm like, what are we doing? I said, we got to have the right equipment. You want people to be happy. You can't be cooking on this like 1970s stuff, right? Old stuff. We need to get equipment in here so we can cook the food that people want to eat. People wanted to eat healthier, right? Grilled items. And so you have to really, know your customer. And have to know our customer in payments too, but you have to know your customer and what do they want to eat, And so, we really turned it up, and I did a good job at that hotel. We had very popular salads. So we made sure we gave people the variety that they wanted. And believe it or not, people always like a burger. So but if you're going to make a burger, right, you got to make the best burger. You can't just say, oh, it's just ground beef and that's it. No, it's got to
Yeah.
be good quality meat and a good quality bun. A lot goes into things. People come into a restaurant, and my boss used to tell me they have a blank forehead. And when they leave, you have a plus sign, a minus sign, or a zero. So, but you got to serve fresh food. Hot food's hot, cold food's cold. And, the cooks can't yell at the servers, because that's going to spill down where they're not going to be nice to the customers. So you have to have this chain of understanding between everybody. Nobody's yelling at each other. Let's keep everything calm. make sure that we're, doing what we need to do. So, yeah, you have to really take into account people lose sight. They go, oh, I'm going to go to this fancy restaurant. And then you go there and you go, wow, that was disappointing. Either the food wasn't good, the portion size wasn't good, you thought the food was mediocre or the service was not good. You have to have overall like service. You have to have really good service in a restaurant. That's one thing, like, I learned about that a lot is service and the importance of serving and being, you know, making sure people were happy and we were doing things in a timely manner. And yeah, you have to really, there's a science behind all that. There's a science behind making sure that that's all done. Hot food hot, cold food cold. No one wants to get a hot salad. You
Yeah,
know, they don't want to
100%.
eat that hot salad. Who wants a salad that's sitting out for 10 minutes?
Yeah,
No, you got to make
and
sure that that's what you're doing. I mean, even people amazed when I'm cooking at home and I made like a whole meal for everybody came over to my house for a holiday and there was chicken and brisket and side dishes and all this stuff. And it's all like boom, boom, boom. I'm like, yeah, just get out of the way. And they're like, well, how did you make all that in just a couple hours? And I'm like, yeah, it's just organization and understanding what takes the longest to cook and starting that first. And things like that. It's the same thing in the payments business. We take, you take that kind of lesson and, you have to know your customers. You have to know, oh, what kind of equipment do people have? You have to know what kind of software they're using. You need to know what kind of business they're in. And, we have to build them a payment stack, right? Instead of building a salad, we're building a payment stack. And you have
yeah,
to understand, the business, the one thing a lot of people don't get with business is, and I try to teach this to merchants, all business owners all the time is, sales. When you have a business, you also have to be a salesperson. And you just can't say, oh, I'm opening up, I'm going to sell cups. Who's going to go sell the cups? They're not going to sell themselves. Someone has to go sell these cups. So you have to put yourself out there, in person or digitally, like we were talking when you were at the office about how to put yourself out there and do that. And you have to you have to be the salesperson. You're the face of the company, you're the face of the business. So it doesn't matter whether it's a restaurant, whether if it's a restaurant, how is that marketed? Some restaurants market around like the owner, or it's marketed around the name, or it's marketed around the cuisine or the vibe or whatever, the scene, whatever it is, right? And or it's a chef focused restaurant. So in the chef focused restaurant, people want to see the chef. They want to know the chef. They want to know what the chef is doing. So, you have to figure that out in whatever business that you're in. And I remember my boss, I told you they sent me to Dale Carnegie because they're like, yeah, you can't just sit around and not talk. You got to talk. So you have to learn how to talk. And whatever business you're in, you have to be the expert. That's the most important thing. You're the expert. Like I know people, they say, oh, ask this, call Alan. He knows everything.
yeah,
I don't know. If I don't know it, I'll find it out. It's not, because I know people who know more than I do. And there's people that know a lot and they call me and they go, hey, tell us about this or tell us about that,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's important to keep up. Technology today is moving at a rapid pace.
right.
So lesson business is business and sales is sales, right? But one thing a lot of business owners don't understand is, you know, how to collect money. That's a whole nother thing. And you
Yeah,
have to understand that. Like in a restaurant, yeah, people come in and then they have to pay. Or let's say you're selling these cups. When are you collecting the money? Are you collecting the money before you ship the cups out? When the customer gets the cups, are you giving them terms? How are you going to arrange that in your cash flow? Do you have enough cash to carry people for, carry their invoices. It's not a good plan if you're planning on doing that. And it can be stressful every time you open up your QuickBooks in the morning and you go, man, I'm owed 30 grand. I'm owed 40 grand. And then you're like, well, where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the money? You're yelling at the salesperson. Salesperson wants to get their commission. Well, you didn't collect the money. So that's something businesses have to struggle with, because cash flow in a business is very, very important. If you don't have good cash flow, you're going to have problems. And it doesn't matter what kind of business you're in. You're going to have you're going to have issues running your business, because then vendors aren't getting paid. And a lot of times, and I see that happen to businesses a lot. Like, they're not paying their rent, they're not paying their vendors. Then, things are running awry inside the business. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be a retail store, it could be a social media company. It can be a lot, because if you're giving terms to people and you're not consistently collecting money and you don't have cash flow, that can put a strain not just on your business, but on your personal life also. I mean,
Yeah.
you can have a stomach ache when you look and you're like, "Hey, I'm owed 30 grand." People like, "Whoa, we're giving terms." And I say, "Well, you're wrong, because people could get terms from their credit card, right? Give me your credit card. Though your bank will give you terms. And then if you don't pay them, you'll pay interest, because as a business, you're not going to collect interest from your customers. But you got to get paid. If you're not getting paid, it's a problem. And then you're going to have besides business problems, you're going to have personal problems. And then if
Yeah.
you have staff, you got to
100%.
have money to pay your staff too.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
a lot of people don't do that. They'll get into a business, and the next thing you know, they find themselves in a hole for 50, 100 grand. And they're like, man, what happened? And what happened was you didn't collect the money. And today, in today's environment, somebody goes out of business and owes you 10, 20 grand. You're never going to get the money. So
Yeah.
you got to really understand how to operate and collect funds. So it's like everything. You're doing everything in a business. You got to be an accountant. You got to be the accounts payable, accounts receivable, the salesperson, the manager, the HR person, and sure, as you grow, you can lay some of that off on others, but ultimately it comes back to the owner.
100%. And man, it sounds like all these lessons you learned early on just completely carried over and completely translated. Like, it's
Yeah, business.
how to
Yeah.
operate, how to sell, how to, be efficient with everything. And when you started to dive into the payment space, like, take us back to that time where, you talk to your friend. He says, "Man, I'm doing really well in this space. You should think about starting." Walk us through how that was when you started out. Like, what were those beginning times like?
The beginning, first of all, is I had to learn how to do something I wasn't doing before. Get out, get in the car, drive around, walking indoors, talking to people. And eventually, I started making sales. I started making good money. But I was working for, not, you know, you have to I'm the type of person, right? I'm very inquisitive, right? So people started asking me for stuff, and these guys that I was working for, they didn't have any of the stuff. People were like, "Oh, I want this check machine thing where you can take a check and put it in it and it goes in my bank account." So I go ask them about it. No, we don't have that. Another person, "Oh, I have a website. I need a authorize.net." No, we don't have that. Okay. Now we got call on a restaurant. "Oh, have this." These people need a thing, a VAR sheet. They were like, "We can't do that." And I'm like, "Man, what is going on? There's got to be people doing this stuff, right?" And I met this guy that was Riyadh, and he gave me my first copy of the Green Sheet, the magazine I was telling you that I write for now, and I've written for them over the years. In their they have a quarterly advisory group that writes articles and weighs in on topics. And and he gave me that magazine. I started calling up some of the companies in there, and I figured out, oh, I could start my own company. And these companies did offer these products that people were asking for. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to tell these guys, like, I'm out of here and start my own thing because I don't believe like this wasn't going to work for me long term. Right. Because if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. And that's what you have to do. And the days of beginning selling payments and today, it's like night and day. I mean, we've been through so many equipment upgrades over 25 years. When we started out, we were just selling credit card processing. Then all of a sudden it's PIN debit. You weren't even born, probably. Just kidding. PIN debit, people wanted to put in their PIN pads. And I have this theory about products that me and one of my friends talked about one day. And he goes, you know how a product is good? The product is good if PIN pads is a good example. So banks started telling all their customers, oh, get this debit card, get a debit card, get a debit card, put in your PIN number. It's secure. Put in your PIN number. So now you have all these commercials and back then newspaper ads, get a PIN pad, da, 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 and they're giving debit rewards right back to the card holder. So now businesses are getting hounded by their customers. Hey, I want to pay with debit. I want to pay with debit. So what do we have to do? Start selling debit, right? Same thing. People are still walking around with checks. They want to pay with a check. Businesses needed those check machines, right? Everything starts to facilitate through, especially in the payments business, things that customers want, businesses need to have. So, you know, ACH, debiting somebody's bank account electronically. People start wanting that. Businesses have to adapt. Pay by, the big thing was we were trying to sell, this thing, pay by link, where you send a link to somebody, they click it and pay. And we had
Right.
some pretty decent adoption of that, but COVID really sped that up really fast.
Right.
So, like when that started happening, all of a sudden it's like, oh, don't get checks in the mail, right?
Yeah,
Boom, I
for
went to
sure.
work right away, hit the ground running, calling every person that I demoed that software for over the last 12 months or more and going back to them, hey, now you have this problem. What are you going to do? Boom, boom, boom. I have the solution for you. You already saw it. Oh, show me another demo. Boom, boom. Oh, let's sign up. And then we were so as things change, Apple Pay, right? People are like, oh, you got to have the Apple Pay so people can tap their card and tap their phone. You got to have these things. It's even a lot of restaurants are resistant to the pay at the table. You know, it's the norm. I mean, when I see restaurants and they don't have pay at the table, I'm like, what are you doing? In a restaurant, you got to turn your tables, right? So, your friend worked in the restaurant business. So if you don't have pay at the table, how are you going to turn tables faster? Every
Yeah.
restaurant today probably has the same problem when it comes to help, right? They don't have enough waiters, enough waitresses, wait staff, host, so, that helps speed things up, taking the order at the table, having the people pay at the table. You have to take things and speed things up, in those environments. And and that's, the same thing with internet. We have to, I look at myself, I say, well, I'm not just the payments guy. I'm also like the payments coach or the payments advisor or your chief payments officer because, somebody's selling, let's say you're in a business like yours and now, okay, we're going to do all this stuff for you and it's going to cost you 5 grand a month. Okay. Well, you need to have a contract. How are you executing the contract? Is it electronic signature? It better be. Or how are you collecting the credit card information? Do you have an authorization form? Boom, 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 boom. These are things that if you're not doing it correctly can result in chargebacks that you can't win. So I just did a
Right.
webinar about chargebacks and how we help people review their business process because you have to look at your business process and make sure how are you working in your business And how does that process work from the sales process to the sign up process to collecting money? And then if a chargeback occurs, how are you going to defend that? And that happens in every,
Yeah.
any business, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, service businesses, every kind of business can get affected by that.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And with your customers now, what do you see as the biggest challenges for them? Like, what is the biggest hurdle, obstacle, everything that you're stepping in and helping with?
A lot of businesses now are struggling with fraud. And with AI, fraud is just increasing because people are going to use AI to figure out how to beat your contract. Or they're going to do it, and people that's too, I think one of the things is like fraud protection. The, the, the card brands, Visa and MasterCard, they've kind of like pushed all of that onto merchants, right? And I think they've pushed so much of that back to the merchants that now I think it's time for them to change. Fine, they need to make the changes on the card issuing side to the banks that issue the credit cards, and say to the banks, "Hey, we need to get to a point where we have to stop all this fraudulent activity, and these people on this side, the business owners, merchants, have done enough, right? Now something needs to be done on the card issuing side. I think the card issuing side, that they need to have two-factor authentication on certain transactions, um, like let's say, like they can geolocate you. They know like where you are, but you should, like, let's say you're trapped. Let's say I'm living Fort Lauderdale, and now, whatever, I'm in Miami. Well, they know that's where I am, so they know that's in my general area. But now let's say I'm in Atlanta. Oh, they should be, oh, did you travel? You should have to send your bank a message. Oh, I'm going to be traveling in Atlanta, and make it like an easy way for you to do that, and then have like spending limits. So maybe you set your personal spending limit at $100. Anything over $100, I want a text message. Every time I leave a tip, I want a text message. And that way, those are double approved transactions. Or every time you buy something on the internet, there's a text message and you got to put a code in. Because if they're not going to do that, the pressure on the merchants is getting too much. They have this new chargeback rule about Vamp, and then we have a new that's from Visa, and then MasterCard has a new rule, and that's just going to apply too much pressure on businesses to maintain good business. They need to really figure out how to do something to prevent people from doing what I call friendly fraud and just stealing from businesses. I mean, it's ridiculous. People just go, "Oh, I don't remember spending $800 at this nightclub." Well, you were there. They know you were there. They can. I mean, your chip was used. I mean, that was the thing. Like in 2015, they came out with the EMV chip, and that was supposed to be the end all everything, right? Oh, everybody's got to get these chip machines, take the chip, and no more worries. And we saw chargebacks in restaurants, nightclubs, pretty much everywhere disappear in the card present world, right? We saw the levels just go. And then all of a sudden,
Right.
like 2 years ago, it started going back up. I'm like, man, what is going on? It's the same chip card, but now we're letting people make stuff up, new things, and so they don't want to pay, and that's what we call friendly fraud. And that just has to stop because it's costing businesses too much money, and they need to get this technology, this 2FA technology going on the card issuer side. They're as much to blame as the scammy card holders, but that's the only way to stop people from saying like their card was stolen, and then they don't want to pay their bill. You know,
Yeah.
it's a lot for
And
businesses to deal with.
right. And as you step into these businesses and you bring your system in or you start to ask questions, where do you all differentiate? from, some of the other players in the industry?
Well, we try to, one thing is that a lot of people don't understand. They think, oh, I'm just taking payments, right? And it's just, it's the customers giving me money, but it's a lot more complicated than that, right? And basically, you're getting a loan. Okay. Because the customer hasn't paid their bill and the bank's just giving you the money that's on, like, you come to my restaurant and I charge your card. Well, you didn't pay your bill, and it's not like you paid your bill while you were sitting there, right? With the settle up with the bank. You have 30 days to do that and everything. So, basically businesses are getting this they're getting all this money, right? And then there's things that could go wrong on the backside of that. And a lot of business owners don't understand that. They think, oh, I don't understand. How is this happening? How is that happening? So, we just make sure people understand the rules. Like when it comes to chargebacks, what do you have to do? What is a lot of people don't know this, but you do it. Let's say you do a chargeback. Your bank decides who wins. So if they like your story better than my story, then you get your money back and I lose my money. And I don't think
Right.
that's fair. I think there should be a third party that decides these type of things, because I don't think that the card issuer of the card holder should be the referee.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you. And, you've been in the game this long and up to this point. Where do you feel that business owners maybe are not paying attention to certain things that they should? And what would you tell folks to look out for?
Well, I think business owners really need to start thinking about technology and how technology can help them run their business. And this includes, point of sale systems and software and SaaS software, and what you're, how you're and how you're operating your business, and understanding that, and understanding your costs and your cash flow. But it's super important to understand, like, like there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? What did somebody tell me one time? They said, what did they tell me? I'm not going to remember the saying, but there's no free lunch. The free lunch, like the free luncheon's in the mousetrap, right? So once you get into the mousetrap, right, the mouse is dead or injured, right? But once you get into a
Yeah.
mousetrap where you're bought the wrong thing, you really have to start thinking about, oh, I'm going to get this technology, and then, or I'm buying this product, whatever it is, a computer or software, and what is how does it all work? And a lot of times they just don't know, and they don't use the technology properly. And I put people in two categories. We have the older group, which is 40, 45 and above. And then you have younger people. And then there's like another group off to the side, the people that like cash, right? And, during COVID, we saw lots of businesses all of a sudden like, oh, pay us with Chime, pay with Venmo, pay with Cash App, pay with Zelle. And then, the government came in and cracked down on that and made these companies start reporting like, hey, if somebody's processing $800 or more, that's a business. That's not personal stuff going on, right? So it must be, has to be reported. And that, those are the kind of things that people have to understand. Uncle Sam's coming for their pound of flesh, you know, and there's still people that love cash, and there's people that deal in a lot of cash, and there's businesses that where it's just all plastic. And people just have to decide how to operate. I ask businesses a lot of questions. I'm like, okay, well, how do you do this? And they're like, well, why do you need to know? And I'm like, well, I could give you, I'll give you an example. I was linking up, got this company approved for their website the other day. And I'm like, okay, which gateway do you want? You want the NMI gateway or the authorized.net? Which one does your website person know how to hook up? Right. So first they said NMI, then they messaged me back, no, the guy wants AuthNet. I'm like, okay. So we want to give you the technology, and then we explain to people like, hey, there's velocity settings in there. Make sure you don't go and turn all those off because those can cause a problem, and that can, you know, that can cause a problem on your, during your acceptance period. And then we have to ask people like, oh, do you take international payments? Okay, well now you need to adjust some settings in your velocity settings so that if somebody does bring you an international credit card, um, those credit cards will go through because international credit cards don't check the address. The US system doesn't have a way to check like address in France or their zip code over
Right,
there, but it can check the credit card number and it can check the security digits. And they came out with a new thing, ANI, which checks the name on the credit card. And I wish like all of that got integrated into all the processors already. Things like that.
right,
Those are the kind of things like they come up with things, but then it's not executed for months or even years down the road. And that
right,
kind of needs to change because with AI, you would think like, okay, well, we can do this, and then where are we going to place it in the system, and how can that work? And it just needs to. They need to figure out how to make this stuff work fast
right.
because you have to have
Yeah,
ways to stop with the amount of online businesses. If I go back to 2001 to today, man, you're talking about in a 25-year acceleration, right? Today,
yeah,
more, on a daily basis, people are opening up businesses. Most of those businesses are some kind of internet or non-card present business, service company, SaaS company, software, this, that. So you really have to, and also credit card issuing has gotten really fancy too with virtual cards and cards that
yeah,
can, like you can go in your Apple phone and your iPhone, right? If you have Apple Pay, you could go in there and create a new card just for one certain purchase,
yep,
right? Still
yep,
comes on
yep,
your same bill, right? Then you can
yeah,
go back and let's say you're using that card for like a free trial or something. You can have that card set to like $1. So now you took your free trial of software. The company tries to charge you the $15 a month or whatever it is, and it doesn't go through because you have this virtual, and the businesses are just getting messed up with all that. And they should
right,
be, we don't have, the systems don't detect like, oh, is that a prepaid card? Is that a virtual card? What is going on? It's pretty interesting of how all these technologies are just, we're just seeing new technology every day. I mean, caught
right,
AI is doing a bunch of really good stuff, and then it's also doing a bunch of bad stuff. Today, I interviewed someone on my podcast, and we were talking about the synthetic merchant, how there's fake identities out there. It's a real identity stolen from somebody, but then they create this fictional business in order to basically steal money from the credit card system
yeah,
and run what we
yeah.
call a bust
I
out.
can imagine.
They run what we call a bust out. That's what we call.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
It's crazy, man, and so I think back to our business and what we do with our clients. We always dig in and try to find out, these are the content pillars. This is what we're going to share. And it can either be personal stories, lessons that they've learned, but also just educating about the industry, about their business. And that's the kind of stuff that we do constantly. And I feel like y'all are doing an amazing job, with the webinars, putting out content, just letting people know, be on the lookout for this. So can you talk a little bit about y'all's strategy and putting out content like for potential customers, but also just to inform?
well, we get a lot of people that come to us and they're like, "Oh, I don't have time for a demo." So I was like, "Okay, now let's record a bunch of webinars and then we have them available on the website. They're linked to the service page. So if you come to the page about chargebacks, it'll say, oh, book an appointment, watch a webinar. Now people can watch a webinar and learn about chargebacks. It's basically like a 35-minute class and just run through explaining how a chargeback works, what you need to do. how it worked, so we want to have educational material out there for business owners because a lot of times business owners don't know how to handle these things and or they're not working with a company that's willing to educate them on it. Not every company has time to do that. We try to, we try to make sure like when we're onboarding somebody, one of the first things we do if they have a website is review everything. Do you have basic things, terms and conditions, privacy policy, return and refund policies? What does your checkout page look like? Is there a checkbox talking about you agreed to the terms and conditions? Do you share the shipping information back to your customers? That's where a lot of chargebacks happen with um with e-commerce is the shipping information is not clear. Like, oh, are you going to get this in 3 to 5 days, or are you getting it in 3 to 5 weeks? And depending on how expensive it is, you might not want to wait 3 to 5 weeks to get this product. So, expectations have to be met. And I always have one of my sayings I like is under promise and over deliver. So if I say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to get you approved in 2 days," "Oh yeah, let's get this done. We can get everything done in 2 to 3 business days," and then I get it done in 1 business day. Great, you're happy. Like, oh, this guy did a great job. So never over promise and then it's like somebody once came to me. It's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon Friday. "Oh, can you get me set up with a merchant account right now?" Probably not. It's
Yeah.
probably not gonna happen. Or,
Exactly.
"I have an emergency
Exactly.
and I need to get set up right away." Da 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 da. I had a customer once and they were literally opening up on Thanksgiving, and they had another merchant account, and for some reason, they got that it didn't go through and the person disappeared. And the guy called me up frantic. It was like Wednesday morning. And he's like, "I got to do this right now." And I'm like, "Okay, like we got to do, you know, and back in this time period, it wasn't really electronic way how to do things. So I was like, "Hey, are you near a fax machine? Are you near email?" The guy's like, "Oh, I'm near email." I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna send you this document. Let me walk you through how to fill it out." And sat there and the guy filled it all out. And I said, "Now you got to get it scanned and send it to me." And he figured it out and did it, and we sent it to the bank. He said, "Hey, this is an emergency." And the guy needed like 10 credit card terminals. And I was like, "Dude, you have to make do with like five. I have five in the office.
Yeah.
And there's not getting any more. Like, we can't go get any. There's no more to get." So we got it done and then, got it programmed. And Thursday morning, one of my sales reps, we went and drove it down to where the guy was, and they were ready to go for their event that was starting the day after the night of Thanksgiving was this opening of this nightclub. And it was and, back then phone lines were plugging it all into phone lines and getting it all set up, and then it was successful. But this today we could, but you want to, it's like auto repair business. This is one that really like, this is a business that always gives me a stomach ache. I'll sit there, someone will be like, they're brand new, they're buying an auto repair shop, right? First thing I explain to them, I go, I'm going to explain to you how you can be the happiest person. And I'm going to explain to you how you're going to be the most unhappy person. And the guy's like, "Well, what would make me unhappy?" And I run him through a scenario and I go, person A walks in. "I need 4 tires for my truck." And you put 4 tires on their truck. And then maybe you need to fix their brakes. And the bill is like 2,500 bucks. And then person A doesn't show up. Person B shows up to pick the car up. And he's like, "Oh, person A has to give you the credit card over the phone." Do not do that. I know you want your 2,500 bucks, but you're about to get ripped off. And the guy's like, "How are they gonna rip me off?" I'm like, "Because they can just say, 'I wasn't there.'" They could be giving you a stolen credit card, and you have no clue what you're doing. And you can't do that. And that's just, we explain that to people, when you're doing high value transactions, you have to be really, really careful about who you do business with. It's the same thing on a website. Somebody goes to a cigar website. We have a bunch of those, and they order 5 humidors, and you've never done business with them before. You need to pick up the phone. If somebody in your office that's monitoring that picks up the phone and goes, "Oh, we see you ordered 5 humidors and 5 boxes of expensive cigars," and the person doesn't answer the phone. Click void that transaction. Don't wait for the next day.
Yep.
If they don't call you back by 4 p.m., just void it out. And for sure enough, and the guy listened to me. He calls me the next day. He's like, "Man, I'm so happy I did what you told me." He goes, "This morning I got a phone call from the real card holder saying, why did I charge their credit card $3,500 or whatever it was for 5 humidors and 5 boxes of cigars?" We explained to them, we
Yeah.
voided the transaction. It's going to come off, blah, blah, blah. Sent them the screenshots from the gateway and they were happy. I said, "Yeah, this way, because
Yeah.
if you waited to refund it, then you paid the juice on it. This way, it only cost you
Yeah.
20 cents for the
Uh,
transaction fees, not the percentage." So you have to understand how to run a business and run it effectively, and and spot when somebody's ripping you off. I've seen businesses get ripped off for 50 grand, 80 grand, 100 grand. It's great over the years. I mean, it's happened
yeah.
where people get
Yeah.
they get ripped they get ripped off by people that do things that are basically scams. And it's funny, like some old scams started coming back now. The freight forwarder scam, that was a big scam when I first started. I didn't even understand it. We had a client, they got scammed out of like 5 grand of stuff and the freight
Mm,
forwarder scam. And I was like, "What the hell's that?" And they said, "Oh, that's where the business says, oh, somebody's coming to pick the stuff up, and they pay over the phone. And then this person shows up to pick it up. They're not the card holder. They're some freight company. They just take your goods. It's gone." And then that person's a scammer. They probably gave you a stolen credit card, and a couple of days later, you get a chargeback.
that's awful, man.
Or shipping stuff to
Awful.
a UPS box. That's another big no-no. UPS stores. Yeah, we have like a big client, and they don't sell as much as they used to. They sell toner, so they don't really sell as much toner because people have gone very paperless or gone to other kind of like liquid toner stuff, so they don't have to buy toner. And you know, and he would get these big orders. And I remember I told him, I said, "Dude, that these orders are," he showed me like 2 orders one day. I go, "If the people don't answer the phone, it's fake." So he voided them out. Same thing. The next day or a couple of days later, he got phone calls from these card holders. "I saw, what did I buy from you for $2,000? You have to just be careful and know like what's it's like the same thing. If you had a store and somebody walked in and they bought 500 bucks of shoes, and your shoes are 50 bucks, and they bought 10 pairs of shoes, all different sizes and colors, would you believe that's an actual real sale? And then the credit card had a different name on it that didn't match the person. Like it was a guy's name and it was a woman. You have to be really careful. You have to train your employees to be careful too. I mean, even when it comes to things like cybersecurity, emails and stuff like that. I tell my staff, like, you see emails, you don't know what they are, just delete them. Don't show them to me. Delete them. If it's important, the person will email you back or call you.
Right.
Don't open don't
Man,
open attachments either.
yeah, exactly. Alan, you are full of lessons, full of things business owners need to be looking out for, need to be aware of. So, one, I wanted to acknowledge you. You have an amazing background, a lot of lessons to share, a lot of stories. And two, you're just providing a great service and you're doing something great for business owners out there. So, where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Alan Kopelman. You can go to my website, nationwidepaymentsystems.com. Have up at the top of the website says book a strategy call. It's free. Book a Zoom, book a phone call, and we can go over what you need in your business and talk about, how to improve your workflows, technology, cash flow, things like that.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Alan, thank you so much for taking the time today. I already know a few people who I'm gonna send this to who can take a couple lessons out of it.
All right.
So, thank you for your
All right.
time, man.
Appreciate it.
Yep. Alright, everybody. Have a good one.
I know I got to wait now. So.